Editorial. Yep, we're good. Ignis has already got 90% of it, so it's just updating. There's our lovely AD.
When on our agenda, populate the fit is supposed to be, because it's not over.
Is it not on our agenda?
Or at least not on the one that I've got.
Okay, do you want me to update the agenda? Let me do
Doesn't
that.
matter, I mean, at this point, whatever, I just want to know when to put it in the flow.
So let me see it again.
That is the,
It goes under, it's not an IDR draft, so I put it right there. Yeah, I put it there. Yeah, here. Actually, Ignis put it in here, might as well.
okay. When do we leave it as the, status? Okay, great. Perfect.
Good morning. Being it's Thursday, we're not really super tight. We'll start in just a few minutes, unlike our starting just on the dot. There will be chair slides for the first couple minutes. If you would add to the Ethernet pad, go to your tools page in IDR, find the Ethernet pad, and help the scribes or people taking notes with your correction of your name, correction of something that's said at the mic. Oh, by the way, I should start the mic procedure out. Hello, I'm Sue Hares. I'm your friendly IDR chair. And this is John Scudder. This is G, our secretary. Please, if you need help, we'll be glad to. Anything else, John?
You can talk about the note well while I'm.
Oh, okay.
And we have a new note well, which I'm going to.
We have a new note well. John's addressing it. So maybe you want to take a look at it. It's not that you've seen it 100 million times, but it's a new note well. You can see that it covers more and more. Notice it covers the ITF plenary session, ISG, ITF working group, birds of a feather, IAB, anything you say here. That's so that we can all share our joint work. Any questions?
Oh, and the one other thing to draw your attention to is it now references RFC 8179, which I intend to use for bedtime reading for the next few days. We've already done this.
I don't mean to. Yeah.
I can, so probably most of you know this, but many of us need to be reminded, that if I say John Scudder, Juniper Networks, it's not very nice for the note taker. But if I say John Scudder, Juniper Networks, then they have some hope of maybe spelling my name a little bit like what my name is. So for some reason, people who speak slowly and clearly all other times say their names really fast, I've noticed. So try not to, please. Thank you.
Go ahead with the status.
So when I was compiling these, I realized apparently we've been a busy group. So we don't have, at least as of last night, any new RFCs issued, but we have an Auth 48 completed and an RFC number assigned, so pretty close. 2 sent to the IESG, so presumably, barring surprises, we should be moving those along soon. We have a finished working group last call, which is waiting for the Shepherd to kick that along. We have, as you will hopefully have seen, 2 working group last calls currently in progress. Please take a look at those and provide feedback if you haven't yet. You know, of course, not during this group, but maybe during the next group where you're reading your email, you can take the time to respond to those working group last calls, and we can close them out promptly. We had a working group last call for tunnel end caps and had active discussion that called for a document revision, and I think we'll be hearing a report about that document during the meeting, and hopefully we will be ready to do working group last call it soon. And again, I encourage you to, in any of these working group last calls, the chairs can't really say, yep, we have consensus to proceed if everybody just looks at their shoes and doesn't reply. My favorite thing on a working group last call is not +1, but it's not my least favorite thing either. It's much better than silence. So encourage you, when we working group last call that document, to take the time to engage and say, yes, please, or no, thank you, this was always a terrible idea, or, well, whatever. Provide feedback, which sends the authors back to the drawing board again, but anything but silence, please. Okay, so we have at least, unless I missed something, 5 new working group documents. And let's see, of which 3 segment routing ones. There was, in several of the working group adoption calls, there were various different suggestions about, can we merge these 2? Can we merge these 3? Can we adopt the encoding of this one into this other one, et cetera? There didn't seem to be consensus, strong working group consensus to do any of those things. We spoke to the various authors and said, what do you guys think? And with the sort of enthusiasm you might have guessed, nobody was very excited to go and respin their document for this. So as of now, we have adopted them as 3 separate documents, and they're also at 3 different sort of levels of maturity. So I think if we tried to harness them all together, we might end up, we would end up holding them back to whatever the slowest one is, which is not really desirable. Yeah, and then 2 more. We will be hearing an update about open policy during this meeting. This is not the only one that's waiting for implementation, but anyway, this is the one that I suspect there is implementation out there that just hasn't been reported, and I really wish people would report it, because it's the only thing we're waiting for to send that one off to the IESG and be done. One thing that we didn't put on the slides, and now that I'm sitting here talking about it, I sort of wish we had, and I guess we'll defer it for a later discussion when the chairs have had time to prepare something, conceivably even an interim or a side conversation later or something, is the question of early allocations. And after I finish talking through the status, I'm going to talk about allocations and stuff like that too. Oh, right, it's not early allocation, sorry. It's a related thing, which is implementation, which, as almost everyone in the room knows, in IDR, we have the relatively unusual requirement, tradition, call it what you will, of saying we want to have implementation of protocols before we send them to the IESG. And the question came up, I think Joe brought it up a few months ago, like, why do we allow things to go to working group last call before we have evidence of implementation? And it's a fair question. So far what we've said is we will working group last call your document whenever you're ready for it, but if your working group last call concludes, and it concludes successfully, and you don't have implementation, then you end up in this state. And if you sit there long enough, it may well be that, well, especially if the outcome of implementation is, oh yeah, we implemented that and we found the following defects with the draft, then guess what? We will ask that the draft be updated to fix the defects, and then we'll do another working group last call. So at the very least, a good discussion for the list, and I wouldn't mind using some mic time right now for it also, is should we change our procedures in this group to say we want at least 2 reported implementations before proceeding on to working group last call? I see Randy looking pained. So actually, why don't I pause here? Sorry, I don't have it on Slideware. I'm just asking the question to the room. Shall we have a? Yeah, go to the mic.
John Scudder, Juniper Networks.
You did say it clearly. I didn't say what you had to say, I suppose.
No, you said what I had to say. I had to say John Scudder, Juniper Networks. Randy Bush, IJ. The problem is it will make a queue that has mixed things in it. And now you have 2 separate queues.
Right.
That's all.
Well, I think what we're really talking about is reordering the queue, right? You have a queue to get through implementations, and then you working group last call. I'm not sure I understand your point.
There will be a lot of things waiting for working group last call that are both waiting for implementations and waiting for Robert and I to quit arguing.
Okay, fair point.
Job Snijders, NTT Communications. Indeed, I proposed a few months ago that we should perhaps reorder the procedure. And the reasoning is that we have a number of fairly large drafts that assign tons of code points or code points to be determined. And for the sake of verifying internal consistency and the actual capability to do implementations, I think a last call will be much more informed for all participants involved. If somebody says, hey, I made an actual implementation, it at least compiles. If we forgo that step, then we cause ourselves additional work if we have to go back. Or even worse, if something is published and we then discover mistakes, we have to wear the cone of shame. So I think the quality of documents will significantly improve if we ask for implementations before last call instead of after.
Jeff Haas, to disagree completely with what Job said. When you're doing most software development process, you have a functional spec that's clear before you actually start writing code. In this case, you're trying to actually write something that can interoperate with people. The purpose of last call, as you mentioned, is not necessarily that drop it to the RFC editor for our stuff. We have the waiting for implementation state. The tracker lets us actually keep track of that. By having the last call done, we get the working group to sort of shake out any of the semantic issues so that the spec is clear, so that people actually could do something and actually get a interoperable set. And if you're lucky, 0 issues are found. It just drops to RFC after that. If you're not lucky, you find logic issues as part of implementation, and our process still works.
Bruno Decran, Orange. One issue with delaying working group last call is that if you delay it for 2 years waiting for the second implementation, people from the first implementation will not likely accept any technical change. And in which case, it's less useful to do a last call because you will just change comma or editorial. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
AC Lindum, Cisco Systems. I'd like to completely agree with Jeff that what you're doing, if you delay it more, you're further back-ending the whole publication process, and you're making the implementers put forth even greater gamble that what they're doing is going to change. So you're raising the entrance barrier on implementations by doing this.
Thank you. I have one other question. I sat in the GROW and working group and noticed that we had yet missed another RFC that was useful for the ops people, that there was a community draft that had waited for years for 4 FIDASs. How does that affect all of this wait? Because we're trying to get to the early allocations to make sure you have those code points. You can answer the previous question.
No, I was going to ask a different question. This is Mahesh Jetanandani, Cisco Systems. Sue probably knows what I'm going to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. Any question on the BGP Yang module? What the status is? What are we doing with it?
Okay, that's a valid additional question. We have a challenge, and Mahesh probably already knows that I've talked to him about the challenge. The Yang Doctor's new requirements is that all things being published at this point go through the revised data store. However, we have the IDR mantra that we will only release to RFC things which are fielded. The fielded of the pre-model that's on the current IDR adoption and is an IDR draft is actually being deployed, but it's not going to be a revised data store. I have talked to our friendly AD, and we will actually probably publish the deployed one and publish a revised data store one at the same time. At this point, we may, for the good of other working groups, publish the revised data store one without implementations. That is a sort of compromise mode to make us at least friendly to other working groups. If you have a strong disagreement with this, this was going to be floated on the list later.
Keyur Patel, Arcus. I think I agree with that. As a co-author and an editor of the document, there are implementations out there, and for the reference for those implementations that are shipping, actually, it makes sense to go and at least document the existing work that has been done.
Jeff Haas, this is exactly what versioning in Yang is for. We have a version of this BGP stuff that is shipping. It's not at RFC status. It's not going to be conformant with stuff that we're wanting to go to. That said, IETF wants us to move to this. It's perfectly fine to ship a 2.0 that fits the new thing. And based on how this code tends to work, it's not usually a giant challenge to reorganize your code. What your customers want you to actually support, whether the version 1.0, the 2.0, or potentially even both, is really up to the vendor.
I have a question for you, Jeff. If that particular versioning doesn't work, but we use 2 different names, would you be opposed to that?
2 different what names?
Name 1 for the BGP Yang model, name 2 for the current one, name 2 for the one that goes in the revised data source. And Mahesh will tell me how bad that idea is.
It's not necessarily a bad idea, and Yang specifically allows you the support for the exact same module name, multiple versions.
Mahesh Jetanandani, Cisco Systems. I think by implication, so if you're asking, can I have 2 different namespaces for the same model? Is it ideal? Probably not. But I think the bigger question to ask is also, do the 2 models have to be backward compatible?
Yes, and I'll ask that to the room. My understanding as Yang Doctor, let me ask the question, reiterate your question. Do we require that the 2 models be backward compatible?
Jeff Haas, regardless of what we require, the structural change that moves us to the NMDA model is fundamentally not backward compatible.
And thank you for that answer.
That was an excellent tangent. Thank you. So, yeah, back onto the boring status update. So we have had a couple early allocations. So there's a whole nother segment to talk about, kind of what we can do better on this coming up. So I'll just say we've got a couple early allocation requests in progress, and we have one that we completed recently. So code points are flowing along. And I think finally we have had, I believe, 2 new IPR disclosures. There are the references. I'm not going to post the full text of the disclosures. That's what the website is for.
Randy Bush, IJ. Is my perception correct? We seem to be doing more new code points than in the past. And what's changed? And maybe if we feel there's a permanent change that we need to adapt in some way. I don't think we should discuss this to death at the moment. I'm just asking if my perception is correct.
It's a great question, and I'm going to ask us to hold it until the very next talk, which I have some slides on the subject, and then we should talk about it. Thank you. I think we're almost wrapped on this. We have a wiki. This is the slide that we've projected before. My perception is we aren't getting a lot of use of it. Maybe it's a write-only document. I'm not sure. Actually, can I have let's have a hum, because people may be shy. Hum if you use the wiki, let's say, at least once a quarter. Oh, okay, show of hands, awesome. Okay, so some people actually do it. Hum or raise your hand if you use the wiki either never or seldom. Okay, so there's, it would be interesting to know, either at the mic if you feel like it, or, in email or in the hallway or whatever. What we're doing right, what we're not doing right, is there information you wish you could get to and you isn't available? Is the wiki not working for you for some reason, or do you just feel like you've got all the information you need, so why should you go looking for more? Right, we have an agenda. You've already seen it. And while Robert is going to the mic, I'm going to queue up the next set of slides.
So, Robert Rushford, Bloomberg. So, can you come back to slide number 7?
I can try.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, so there is another draft waiting for implementation, the BGP optimal route reflection.
Right.
And as of now, 10 minutes ago, both are reported in the implementation report. So that one is ready for working with Glasgow and get rid of it.
Awesome. Can we have that in the notes, please? Actually, that's right, you don't have a laptop with you, so you can't put it in the Etherpad yourself. But for those who do have laptops and can open the Etherpad, one useful thing you can do is make sure that, if you make a point like that, make sure that it appears in the minutes. Makes it much more likely that the chairs will remember to do it later. Alvaro.
Alvaro Rotano, Cisco. I was just wondering, before we took the tangent to the Yang model, we were discussing about working group last call, implementation first or backwards. Did we finish? Do we have any thoughts on that? Are you going to say something later? Nothing changed? Everything will change?
I can summarize what I thought I heard, which was I thought I heard more people saying, let's try to keep it, roughly the way it is. I think what I don't want to try to, say what working group policy is on the fly as we're sitting here up at the front of the room. But what we will do is report back to the group sometime in the next few weeks on the mailing list, and then either people can look at that and say, yeah, okay, or we can continue the conversation. Fair enough? All right. All right, well, this is still chair's time, but I'm going to stand in the pink box and walk around just for variety. This is a talk that we keep having, and can't we stop having it? And actually, that's why I'm up here talking, is that the chairs would really love to stop having this conversation. We've, we have a working group policy, and I think sort of generally it is thought in the IETF to be good policy that if you've got a registry that has an allocation policy from which code points are supposed to come, you should get your code points from the registry, and you shouldn't just compile them into your code, or you shouldn't use some out-of-band method for, self-allocating code points. That's what the registry is for. It's to allocate you code points. It's so that you don't have to self-allocate them. So as of right now, working group policy is don't put code points in your documents until they've been allocated. And, we can say that and supposedly make it stick about working group documents. Individual contributions are individual contributions, but if you're targeting your individual contribution as a working group document, you would be well advised to, heed this also for your individual contribution. But people keep doing this, and, they're good, experienced people, and they presumably have a reason other than, I'm not listening to you, and so I'm just going to do whatever I'm doing. And, they're not doing it to, make me feel bad or to give me extra work. So there must be some other reason. So I wanted to stand up and talk about kind of what might the reasons be, what can we do differently, and then there's, I have thought of basically 3 ways forward, which I'll get to at the punchline. So, I started a conversation on the list about a week ago or something, and to parody some of the answers, one of them is, well, don't you think, John, that publishing them in my working group draft is better than just quietly going away and allocating them to myself and not telling you what I've allocated? And true, it is better. But actually, I don't want to have either a broken leg or bubonic plague. I mean, if you give me a choice of the two, I'd probably choose the broken leg. But I'm hoping we have a better option. And the second one, answer that kind of stuck in my mind is, we've got this slow heavyweight process, and code development, moves at time scale this much. And, IETF process moves at time scale this much, and they don't match. And it's unreasonable for you to ask me to slow down my code development and deployment because, you want me to jump through a bunch of bureaucratic hoops to get a code point. Okay, so let's talk about that. I try not to put walls of text on slides, but as I was preparing these, I was looking through RFC 8126, which is the newly minted advice for writing a IANA consideration section. And it's a somewhat long document, but it has some good stuff in it. And I'm just going to read this because I think it captures what, the essence of our problem is here. So while it is sometimes necessary to restrict what gets registered, for example, for limited resources, such as bits in a byte, etc. In many cases, having what's in use represented in the registry is more important. So that's kind of what I summarized on the previous slide. Overly strict review criteria and excessive cost, for whatever cost means, discourage people from even attempting to make a registration. Bingo. If a registry fails to reflect the protocol elements actually in use, it can adversely affect deployment of protocols on the internet, and the registry itself is devalued. yeah, I think that's what we are seeing in a nutshell. So the next few slides, I think, are basically two things. One is to make sure that people know what policies are available when we create a registry. And the second is to make sure that people know that registry policies are not set in stone. They're not handed down to us from on high. They are policies that we, the working group, have set for ourselves for our registrations, and we can change them. Okay. So there's a zoo of 10 different policies that are outlined in that RFC, and we're not required to use those exact templates, but the fact that somebody has sat down and thought through them means that I would certainly rather reuse their work than invent a new policy for myself, if at all possible. So there's two, notably permissive policies that I'm aware of. First come, first served. First come, first served, literally, how many people here have registered something in a FCFS registry? Okay, so, a decent number of people. You go to a form, you put in, I think it's your name, your email address, a symbolic name for the code point you want. You click go. The nice people at IANA, within a business day or two, send you a number or, whatever kind of value you're registering for. It's really that easy. It is, maybe slightly slower than, putting a number, picking it for yourself and registering it in a wiki, or, sticking it into your draft and then uploading the draft, but they're on the same time scale. It's basically, instant turnaround with virtually no overhead. During the email thread that we had last week, one of the objections to, so I put out as a straw man, hey, why don't we just change a whole bunch of stuff to FCFS? One of the objections to that was, or at least maybe this was me projecting onto Adrian's comment, he may not actually have said this, but was, well, there's no sanity checking at all, and do we really need to go all the way towards, anarchy, cats and dogs lying down together, and, there's no, who knows what could happen. There's also an expert review process, which, as long as you're not freaked out about the risk of the expert becoming some kind of tin pot dictator, it's almost the same as FCFS, except there's an expert who's basically the guardian of the registry who gets to say, yeah, that seems reasonable, or you know what, hit the brakes, we need to talk about your registration request. But the expert review process, as long as the expert has sort of the right expectations about what their job is, I think can be almost as lightweight. And then there's various restrictive policies, and a bunch of our code points are under one of these: standards action, specification required, and then two related ones, RFC required and IETF review. All of these basically say something like you have to have an RFC number to get your code point, and this is what people have said. This doesn't actually make sense, especially in a group that requires implementation before getting an RFC number. There's an obvious circular dependency there. So to break the circular dependency, we have early allocation. I talked about recent early allocations we have had in our group. And the criteria for early allocation are you have to have a spec that people can read and be expected to understand. The spec has to be stable, whatever that means. And there has to be interest from the community in actually deploying this thing. So the process that we've followed is roughly, if you can't get your document adopted by the working group, you really haven't demonstrated to us that there's, that the bottom bullet there has been satisfied. If you've got community interest in deployment, you ought to be able to get your group, your thing adopted as a working group draft. So that's kind of the bar that we apply. Once you've done that, or in parallel with your working group adoption request, we've done that multiple times in the last year. You can request an early allocation. We pull the list about it. Once we've, let that poll expire, and assuming there's no objections, and assuming we don't think you're crazy, which I don't think we've ever actually had that happen, but we reserve the right to think you're crazy. Then we ask for the code point, and the AD generally says, yeah, okay. And then we send it off to IANA, and then we're done. So this, as long as everybody's on their game, this can take, 3 weeks-ish. So I think this is my last real slide. What can we do about getting people their code points when they need them? I can see about 3 different options. We can, follow the beatings will continue until morale improves strategy, where we say, well, people keep putting code points in their drafts. We must not be yelling at them enough. We should yell louder. That doesn't sound fun for anyone. Not fun for me anyway, I don't know. Or we can just embrace anarchy and say, do whatever you need to do, and we'll clean up the bodies later if we have to. And we're going to totally stop yelling at anyone. We're going to stop even trying to control what you put in your drafts. Just do anything. That doesn't really make sense to me, speaking as a working group member. And if the working group all gets up and tells me, John, this is really what we want our chairs to do, is just stop trying to even manage these registries at all, I might consider it. If that's what the working group consensus actually is, I think we would have a problem, but it's a potential. This is kind of like when you go to your doctor and they say, you've got this terrible illness, and you say, well, what are my options? And they say, well, you always have the option of not being treated. That's your right. So, okay, the working group has the option of not being treated. And this is the one that I brought up on the mailing list last week, we can say, well, if we have a process that's supposed to do something for us and people aren't finding that process is working for them, maybe we should change the process. And in this case, there's a fairly simple path to doing that, which is we can say, oh, look, there's a registration policy here that's not working well for us. There's another registration policy that's available that might work well for us. Should we move along to reclassify some or all of our registration policies? It's absolutely administrative work to do that. You're just going through registries and saying, well, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, and then you write a short RFC that says it's nothing but an IANA consideration section. And it says IANA is requested to change this policy on this registry to that. And then you get it working group last called, and then you progress it to RFC, and then boom, you're done. So I don't intend that we're going to come to any final conclusion here in this room, but it seemed like it was a current topic. We're here in the room. We've got mics. Go. I'm going to sit back down now.
So, Keyur Patel, Arcus. Typically, these days, when somebody implements a extension, it's generally being asked, as opposed to 10 years back. So it's a bit more formal. And with that in mind, 3 weeks is a little long time. If there's a process that can get us a code point in 2 days, then that's wonderful.
Bill Finner, Arista Networks. I just wanted, when we went through this exercise 8-10 years ago, there was a lot of concern about taking these code point registries that had a couple of hundred spots available and making them first come, first serve. Like, what would we do if someone came along and registered 200 code points using, just made up stuff? I don't have an answer to that, and I don't want to say don't do it, I want to make sure that question is considered.
Yep, that's, I'm going to respond to that. I thought about creating a slide on that, but it turns out that RFC 8126 talks about some of that stuff in detail. So probably the best next step is go and read it. But my own answer to that one is, first of all, if we're concerned about that, we can choose expert review instead of FCFS, which gives you just as, this thin gatekeeper layer where the gatekeeper can say, hey, Skipper, it looks like you're trying to register 200 code points. Would you like some help with that? Or another option is to, and we see this a lot, is to divide up a space into, you get 100, a sub-range of 100 that's, FCFS, and then you just reserve the rest so that, you can't get a run on the bank that runs you all the way out. So I think those are two options we could consider.
Randy Bush, IJ, could you back up one slide, please? Not that I'm comfortable with this approach, but there's something missing there, which is ignore the squatter. The problem with these is it's that we're taking the cost. The blame's over there. They squat on something. The next allocation squats on them.
Okay, I think that's sort of the anarchy option, but I understand what you're saying. You're saying you allow natural consequences to take care of the problem. Thank you.
Alexander Azimov, Curtin Labs. I have a question about the process. So the proper process is from idea, draft, allocation from IANA, RC, and so on. And what if, and here I'm speaking for myself, I have idea, after that implementation, and only after that a draft. So I was just trying to try my idea to find out if it is working, and for this purpose, I've squatted some attributes. I even put these implementation on the GitHub without any purpose to make it public use, just for just a test case. What is the proper process here?
So it's a good question. One answer that exists to that is some registries, not all of them, have experimental use code points. That's what those are supposed to be for, is you pick one of those, use it. The problem with that tends to be, well, what if I won't say it's typical, but it's not uncommon to, sort of, you start out with an idea, you do an implementation, and then life proceeds very quickly and your implementation is fielded and people start relying on it for their infrastructure. And now when I come along and say, well, that was an experimental code point, now you need to get a properly allocated one. You, or more likely your users, look back at me and say, now you're asking me to do a flag day to replace this code point, and that's terrible. Another answer is you make your code point configurable and force your user to do it in configuration. Neither of these are great answers. So the next answer after that is one of these other more permissive allocation policies, which with, oh, by the way, I didn't say this in the slides anywhere, but I think we should never ship another, spec that has code fields smaller than 16 bits. So as long as we do that, I feel like we can really make a lot of use of permissive policies. And then the answer for you would be just go get a code point. And if you...
but if I'm not aware of any IETF process, and it was my point. But when I got the idea, I had no awareness of the IETF process.
Okay, so you don't even, I don't really have a good answer for what happens when people are using our things without asking us. Sorry.
Okay, my suggestion is to.
Take Randy's answer. You know, if they do it and they get into problems, life happens.
Okay, but my suggestion is to have a pool for experimental purposes in each registry. I think it will be helpful.
Yeah, but then people still have to know about that. So
Sure. But at least if there is a pool,
Yep.
you can give a reference.
Experimental is great
Yeah.
when it works. Thank you.
Job Snyder's NTT. I'd like to respond to what Randy Bush said, where you just railroad over the squatter. That doesn't always work. For instance, in the case of large BGP communities, we noticed that the legitimate owner of the BGP path attribute at the time it was 30 was actually the victim of other people squatting on that code point. Had the BGP large community attribute crashed the offending vendor, perfect. The incentive would have been on the operator that has the code with the squatted code points. But the incentive lay actually with the developers of the path attribute and the operators that were experimenting with the path attribute. And this is precisely why RFC 8093 was written, to deprecate all these code points, because very often the squatters do not feel any pain. It's the users of the code point that feel pain. So railroading over squatters does not work. Deprecating their code points is a valid strategy, and I think we should continue to do that if we observe squatted code points. And furthermore, I am in favor of more permissive assignment policies. If so far most of the argumentation is it's too hard to get a code point, so let's make it easier, and that takes away that argument.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Bruno de Crane, Orange. So basically +1. For future registry, I think we could encourage a very large registry with a very permissive allocation. For current one, I'd say that currently when we have squatting, we deprecate the code point. So basically it's lost. So it's already very permissive. So we give it to anyone. It's already first come, first serve. I put it in the draft. I put it in implementation. I say it's too late. On either I got the code point or it's deprecated, but we lost it. So I would call for permissive.
All right, thanks. So excellent discussion. I am hoping that in the next few weeks we can move beyond discussion to actually making a decision what we're going to do. Mostly what I've heard at the mic is, sure, let's reorganize our registries to reflect people's needs better, and that would be my preferred outcome. The next steps are, if we follow that path, are to have somebody write a draft that proposes concrete, how that reorganization will be and what it will look like afterwards. And then we go through the normal working group process of, bashing the draft, talking about the draft, adopting it, and progressing it. So we need, if we're going to follow that, someone needs to step up and write a draft. Yeah.
Keyur Patel, Arcus again. Since you summarized, I think for me, the problem is not the process. You can put any process you want as long as the process takes less than 2 days. If you're going to take 3 weeks, whoever has the process and takes 3 weeks, to me, that's the source of squatting.
And that's kind of what I was trying to say is the fact that we have a problem doesn't mean that people are bad. The fact that we have a problem means that people have needs that our process doesn't meet. So we can either tell people not to be bad, which is terrible, or we can fix our process so that it's easier to follow the process than not follow it, which is what I'm hoping we can do. And as you say, time is a big element of that.
So Robert Rashford, Bloomberg. So I'm just wondering why we are discussing this at IDR. I mean, there's all routing area which has the same problem, and just because BGP is popular, it should not make it unique, right? And every working group should not define their own procedure for actually getting the code point early enough.
Well, so You can answer that in a second. My answer to that is, why are we talking about this in IDR? And the answer is because I'm IDR co-chair, not the routing AD. And also the way that the IETF is structured is most of the work gets done in working groups, and different working groups do have, different traditions at least. We're not inventing new process here. That was kind of the point of my earlier slides, is we have a bunch of process that's already defined. It's up to us to pick one that works well for our community.
Jeff Oz, and it is a problem in other working groups. I'm actually helping other internal people work through some old sins of the past and other technologies. So this is not a problem, just IDR, but to your specific point, why are we having this conversation here? BGP tends to have greater sins because, we're global. The problem that Joe was, bringing up of, sure, you can grab a point, and if you squat on it, the person that suffers is the one that actually tries to get the point legitimately. It's going to cause BGP peering sessions to go down in worst cases, crashes in other cases. The penalty is just much higher, or as I put it in a prior presentation, BGP has a much higher blast radius.
Thanks everybody for the discussion. That was helpful. I think Christoph is presenting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christoph Leuber. I will do a presentation on the FlowSpec draft.
Can you hear Christoph in the back? Good, thank you.
I will do a presentation of on the FlowSpec draft that we are working on. This is actually meant as a replacement for RFC 5575, the current FlowSpec standard. I don't think I need to waste too much time on what FlowSpec actually is. It's this thing where we can exchange flow filters together with flow actions via BGP. Why do we need this update for the current specification? Actually, I can give you an example from a service provider point of view. Last year, we built something like this, where we had 4 different vendors in the network. We had a box from Juniper, Cisco, Huawei, and also Alcatel with a Nokia sticker on it. In the lab, so we built a full mesh with BGP. We had everything set up, and then we threw a few FlowSpec filters into the network. And what happened is that the network just literally burned down. Most of the BGP sessions started to flap, Syslog got crazy, and so on. So there's obviously something wrong with it. And it's not that we are hunting bugs, because the bugs need to be fixed at the vendor's side. But it turned out that there is some general lack of interoperability. And when we dug a little bit more into the problems, we saw, well, there are some unclear sections in the specification, and it tends to be quite hard for the manufacturers to actually implement that consistently. And Susan also pointed out that there is this unspecified behavior on interfering flow actions. We encode those actions into extended communities, so it's possible to have an action that says, okay, please rate limit that particular flow to 10 megabit, and have on the same NLRI attached a extended community that says, okay, rate limit to 1 gigabit. And this is not specified in the original document. It also turned out that already there is a clarification needed for RFC 5575 to get the redirect action right, which is one of the fundamental actions built into the protocol. And I was also sitting on some mailing lists over the last 1.5 years and answering questions on flow spec implementation, and was always reading through the document and trying to get answers, and it was not always possible to get answers from RFC 5575 on that. So what did we actually change with our draft in the RFC so what are the changes to RFC 5575? I mean, there are numerous of editorial changes in it, but, and I need to point out that we are fully compatible with the RFC 5575. So we are not breaking anything what's out there. It's just, we are like more precise on how it's needed to be done. And more precise means we are much more precise on the encoding of the NLRI, because this is where we saw many things breaking. It's a little bit of complex NLRI, obviously, but we saw many BGP notifications happening because just of the encoding. There's one fundamental numeric operator built into the NLRI that allows us to compare ports with a value that's built in there, and there are bit comparisons and so on. And we were just more precise. We tried to document all the different cases that are in there. We also defined the action communities that allows us to do the rate limiting, to do redirect to route targets or whatever. We redefined them to be a transitive extended community, because the draft, the standard is a little bit unclear in that as well. There's at least one of the actions, which is the rate limit action, was defined to be non-transitive, but at the same time it was assigned from a transitive extended community pool by IANA. So this just doesn't fit. And actually all the implementations that we were looking in, they were just acting on that as to be a transitive community. I mean, there's one exception, there's GoBGP. They really had some extra code in it to make this extended community non-transitive, which is ridiculous. So, so we define it to all the communities, the flow actions that are in the document should be transitive. We added a rate per packets action, which is more or less the same at the rate limit by bytes. And we did some changes to the redirect action that I pointed out before, which is one, we pulled in all the clarification information that is in RFC 7674, which actually defines the encoding of the extended community. So we put this into this draft. It should have been there right from the beginning. Then we renamed it from redirect to RT redirect, and there's one reason for this. There are other drafts out there with redirect actions, and we just wanted to be more specific on what this redirect actually is. So there is an redirect to IP next hop out there as a draft, so we just wanted to get out of the way there. And then there is this whole new section on traffic action interference. So what should happen if we have a rate limit to 10 megabit and rate limit to 1 gigabit in one update at the same time? So what we said is just treat it as BGP withdraw, just ignore it. Don't spread it anymore, and don't use it for anything. And we also defined what is the interference, so what traffic actions actually interfere. And we also said, okay, please all new drafts out there defining new traffic actions should actually state how interference between traffic actions should be handled with this new traffic action. And very recently I put in an appendix to to our draft, which just points out this list of changes, because I think this list are the most fundamental changes that we did to RFC 5575. So it makes it easier for a vendor or for one implementing this draft to find out what he needs to do. Well, and the authors believe that this document is ready for working group last call. So we request working group last call. And yeah, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Jeff Oz, thank you. This actually is very useful, having dealt with not only our own bugs, from the first implementation of this, but also with my prior employers, finding of no such bugs because they read the document, it was not clear. One comment I did have was specifically about the communities and the unclarity when you have, for example, a rate limit, and you have more than one of them. Unfortunately, extended communities of this type have this problem everywhere at IETF that they try to do with PGP. The best working group is completely littered with magic communities that do something that they don't define what to do when you get more than one of these types. I'm not sure that we want to go into specification about how to deal with this sort of thing. It's honestly the kind of thing that either IDR or BEST probably should write a document and say, here's what we should do about this as a general thing.
Jeff, thank you for the overarching comment.
My own immediate reaction to that is that since it would depend on the semantics of what the magic community is getting used for, I'm not sure you can create a one-size-fits-all answer to the question. So maybe it is appropriate to cover it in this document.
Jeff Oz again. So one of the possibilities for this is to simply, instead of saying, the semantic has to be defined per thing, that the overarching comment, so sort of putting it, is that for these classes of things, there needs to be exactly one, which means that you need to, when you define something that has, basically a type, there's exactly one of these things, and there's a value associated with it, that the code should be smart enough to realize it's in that class and to strip one of them appropriately. Which one it is going to vary.
Right, but the work, my understanding from your earlier comment is the work in this draft is good and it can go forward, but we really need to, the chairs of IDR and BEST need to go and drain the swamp of the rest of it. Thank you.
Okay,
Gary, I
thank you.
believe you're up.
Thanks. And do we have the clicker?
The clicker, there it goes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Morning, folks. My name is Keyur Patel, and I'm going to talk about the draft update, Tunnel Safi. This is the draft I've co-authored with Eric Rosen from Juniper and Gunter from Nokia. So this is a IDR working group draft, went through the last call, had lots and lots of discussion on the mailing list. And the goal for me here today is to provide update and provide all the clarifications that we gave on the received comments and suggestions, with the hope that we'll be able to close the last call again fairly quickly and move progress the draft towards the standards. So a question was asked on an implementation status. Well, we have implementations specifically to support application for this draft, which is segment routing based DE policies. And the deployments for these implementations have also been planned. So it's about to happen soon. The work on implementation reports is in progress. All vendors are encouraged to fill in the implementation report. There was another question that was asked, which was in context of RFC 5566. So as you know, this draft obsoletes 5512, which is a normative dependency on RFC 5566. For those of you who don't know what RFC 5566 outlines, it's primarily the use for the IPsec tunnels. Clearly, since this draft obsoletes 5512, there is a need to update RFC 5566. Authors believe this is a separate effort and it should be done outside the scope of the current draft. And we have already started a separate effort also to update 5566. Some other suggestions that we had received, there was a need in a couple of sub-TLVs to increase the
length to 2 octets. It was a good suggestion. We have already incorporated that in the later draft revisions. There was a question that the current draft supports V4 sub-TLV for V4DS field, and so the question was for V6, and we have not incorporated it as of now. We are waiting for a use case, and we don't have a good use case yet. That being said, the draft does provide extensions in case for the future TLVs that need to be defined. So we believe if there is a compelling use case, we can always write a companion draft for this and progress that separately. Changes to the text with regards to bare bones tunnel TLV. Bare bones tunnel TLV is usually a TLV that only carries tunnel type and the endpoint. It doesn't carry any encapsulation information associated with the tunnels. So the Rev 5 said, don't use this TLV. Essentially, let's go and use extended community instead to be backwards compatible. And the Rev 6 of the draft sort of loosens this rule and lets you use both the bare bones TLV as well as the NCAP extended community. This is to provide an additional flexibility for the backwards compatibility as well. There was also a suggestion on the mailing list where folks said, hey, why not just carry only one tunnel TLV instead of allowing an option to carry multiple? And the authors feel that an ability to announce multiple tunnels is an important feature, and it's a flexible thing to do. So we like to leave it in the draft. Having said that, implementations could always choose to restrict their implementation to only source single tunnel TLV if they want. So that would be an implementation dependent thing that we don't want to enforce in the draft. Lastly, there was a question about a need for destination MAC field in NVGRE sub-TLV. And this is essentially used to specify destination MAC header inside for the inner Ethernet header. And the suggestion on the mailing list was to use the draft format or the proposal that is listed here in the draft YONG. The problem with that suggestion is that the draft has been expired for 4+ years. It's not a working group draft. And the current TLVs that we have defined are in accordance with RFC 7637, which itself is the RFC outlining NVGRE. So the authors thought it's best to leave the current encapsulation TLV as is and not fiddle around with it. So with that, I think the authors have addressed almost all the comments that we've received so far. The hope is to close on to the implementation reports fairly quickly and then probably reissue the last call and get it towards the standardization. Questions?
Thanks. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, we can start that last call next week.
Super.
If you guys think you're ready. Yeah.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Haas, as you probably figured out by now since I've been up to the microphone a bunch of times. So I'm here to talk about the route server BFD feature. Now, this is our fourth update on this. We're sort of slowly converging on the encoding formats that we need to deal with for this feature. This has actually generated a very interesting amount of discussion. To briefly go over what the feature is for. So in route server environments, especially exchange points, layer 2 partitioning happens. This causes black holes. This is a significant operational headache that keeps some people from even wanting to participate in exchange points. And in some other cases, it actually just simply becomes a discouraging thing for when the black holes happen and people just live with them. Problem is, what do you do about this when you're using route servers? Route servers are eBGP, proxied via an external device. Normally, you'd run BFD directly to each of the clients, but since you're doing it via a proxy, this option does not directly work for you. This means that our sort of test changes a little bit for our eBGP case. The suggestion we're making is that you use BFD to test the reachability of the individual next hops. If you fail the BFD reachability test, you just simply make the route ineligible for selection, just as if it was an IBGP type route. The big trick here is that route servers exchange their routes in such a way that some peer may actually receive a route with a given next hop, and the other peer that is sourcing that next hop may not receive the receiver's next hop itself. This means if you're trying to run BFD between a given pair of systems, you may not have sufficient information in the received next hops to know who to build your BFD sessions to. And BFD RFC 5081 does require you to actually have both of those points available. The other thing that this feature does, and where most of the document actually spends its time, is on the ability to not only learn the set of next hops, but also inform the route server of the actual reachability from the perspective of these route server clients. This allows the route server, potentially, when it makes sense for the route server to do so, to potentially select a different set of routes, to replace the ones that are no longer reachable. And one way to think about this is that this is allowing the route server to receive a proxied view of whether the next hop is reachable or not. So in terms of changes to the document since 02, we've done significant cleanup of the specification and the encoding. We got rid of the negative state. The document had at that point been through 4 distinct sets of editors, and the style had definitely shown that. And, John Scudder took the pen up and significantly cleaned things up. So hopefully this takes care of one of the biggest things that people commented on, that the document was hard to read. And the state exchange is much simpler at this point. The next hop information base idea still remains, but the idea has actually been split into the idea of a reach ask and a reach tell mechanism. I'm asking you to track this next hop. I'm telling you what the next hop state is from my perspective. In terms of the messaging, we've decided to lift instead of encoding this in BGP extended communities and having the mechanism track through there, we've gone and lifted an encoding that's closer to what we see out of the best type encodings with a structured NLRI. Basically, whether this is a reach ask or reach tell, and report the state of whether it's unknown, meaning that the BFD session itself is not actually up yet, which may never happen if it's not enabled on a given side, or whether it's up or down. Past that point, it's just the next hop that's being tracked. In terms of known issues on the document, the procedure for using the next hop state from the client's view is not listed in the current, as being optional in the current document. That was sort of an oversight as part of the cleanup. Now, our goal is not to mandate route servers must do this. There are operational environments for some route server providers that they simply do not want to do this. But even so, even if you're just using this for the clients to make use of the BFD state, this is actually potentially an interesting bit of telemetry for the route servers anyway. Also, the procedure for about the reach ask needs to be slightly clear about what we set the state bits to. Now, this generated an unusually large amount of discussion on IDR, so that means people actually read the document, have an opinion on it, so that's great. So answering some of the individual points, why isn't this an ORF? ORF being an outbound route filter. Well, part of the problem is this information is highly dynamic. ORFs tend to have this implication that there's an explicit refresh in there. Whether or not you actually do an actual route refresh is actually up to the implementation by the current ORF specification. But the sort of internal implication of the ORF feature is that it's actually policy. This is closer to route resolution than policy, so I don't think that's necessarily a good fit. Additionally, we have RT Constrain as a published piece of work that shows us that we can use route exchange as a way to help control the signaling of stuff. The other thing that makes ORF slightly complicated is the ORF procedures actually document that they are treated as AND policies. And in the future, if no ORFs actually do get other forms of deployment in the route server environment, this sort of complicates the ability to use this for this piece of the feature. Another observation is that if you are actually informing the route server that a next hop is not usable, what do you do about that? In the case where you have a peer or an update group, depending on what your implementation calls such things, and there's multiple peers inside of that, potentially not even from the same autonomous system, that it may not be able to react appropriately. So an example of this is some route server environments have the default view that you subscribe to, may have hundreds of peers in there, and one peer reporting that I can't get to this next hop may make that environment to the point where it just simply cannot respond and give that one peer new stuff. That's totally reasonable. However, that's not also the only way route servers are deployed. Several people deploying bird route exchanges, including the co-authors on our document, actually deploy a route server view per autonomous system. Another consideration is why do you want to do this? You want to be able to get alternate paths from the route server's perspective rather than just simply avoiding the black holing. Avoiding the black holing on its own is a massive win. Getting the alternate paths is a bigger win to allow the actual exchange point to have good value. Could we get this a different way than letting the route server just simply choose based on this proxied next hop reachability? Now, why don't we use add paths? Well, the answer is you certainly could use add paths. Matter of fact, you could use add paths in conjunction with this as well. But some of the considerations that we had when we were discussing this is that, number one, some IXPs simply don't want to use add paths. And apparently in many cases, client routers don't want to use it for various reasons. This could be limited amount of memory, and it could also be something along the lines of just simply the policy of the receiving peers. There's a couple of other considerations that make add paths a little tricky. The first one being that even with add paths, you typically choose some number of additional paths to send along. Based on exchange point topologies and path diversity, there is a possibility that even if you say, for example, give me 2 paths so you have a backup, that second path may also not necessarily be reachable based on how types of partitions happen. An example at the Frankfurt Exchange, which I have stats on this down below, they have 1,000 ports. It's possible that a partition may actually isolate a whole set of next hops, and therefore the next best path may still not necessarily be useful. Looks like Carrier may have a point. Oh, okay. Carrier's skipping out of here. So the sort of last lingering bit is that add paths really was intended for IBGP. It hasn't really been clarified for how it would work in a route server environment, which is eBGP, but not really. There is a prior draft that Pradosh Mahatra had done years ago with some of the implications of eBGP for route servers. And just for consideration, this is the DE-CIX Frankfurt topology. And as you can see, there's a chance for potentially a large number of peers to be isolated by a layer 2 partition, that may actually cause us problems. I have one more slide and I'm happy to take questions. So the last one is Anchor Chen and a few other people, Robert I think was actually on there, put out a sort of last minute draft of, how could we do this a different way? And I think there's actually some good ideas in there. The first one is that, in terms of the BFD stuff, part of the reason why we needed the ability to learn the next hops from the route server is because 5881 requires both sides to be provisioned. This document proposes, hey, let's change 5881 so that we have effectively wildcard BFD. This is actually a good idea. That said, there's 2 headaches there. First one is that it will actually require respecking of BFD. Take that to the BFD working group. The chair standing up in front of you would be supportive of the work. But the sort of secondary headache there is that BFD gets put into a lot of interesting things, and not only is it in software, but it's often in silicon, and in many cases it's in potentially silicon that can't be revved. So to pick a specific example, Broadcom does not have the ability to update their 5881 implementation because of the way they have it in their ASICs, and those are in a lot of lower end routers and switches. Larger vendors, just simply spin up a new set of code for their ASICs and they're done. And sort of finally, the BFD portion of the RSBFD document is really the smallest bit of the procedure here. Mostly what the document is trying to do is say that on top of this BFD procedure, we do want to let the route server to do something additional. And we have, in the case of the draft Chen, we can do this via add paths. We have the considerations I mentioned before versus the RSBFD ones. Questions?
So, Keyur Patel, Arcus. Back when we did ORR, we had a Nextop SAFI where we used that to simplify ORR computations. My question is, can we not use can we not leverage that SAFI here for the work that you are doing with an idea that we could then use a generic Nextop SAFI for anything that is needed, for anything that requires Nextop level computations?
Excellent question. Draft 00 before working adoption actually used the Nextop SAFI. What we decided after we were going through the exercise is that it wasn't quite a good fit. And we didn't want to face distorting that draft in a way that didn't really make sense for the actual main purpose of that draft. So we went there, we decided, wrong answer.
AC Lindum, Cisco Systems. I realize you haven't had any time to think about this, but given that this is a lot of new mechanisms that would be implemented both on the route server and the clients, there could be other alternatives too. And one thing that I thought of, and nobody thought this was too crazy, is why couldn't you run OSPF between all the clients with BFD and then repurpose the things that we have in our existing optimized route reflector technology with eBGP, sort of? I mean, it's not exactly that, but it's all the same type of work.
Don't go away. So so I'm going to throw two things back at you. The first one, that ORR from the perspective of the route server probably is a little bit more work than the route servers are typically expected to do. The main consideration there is route server policy tends to actually be structured around actual policy rather than IGP reachability. The exchange point is considered flat, so sure, you could technically use some of the plumbing, but it's not really a good fit. But the second one is, if I were to come up to you as the OSPF chair and recommend that you have a whole bunch of different organizations all run a cooperative protocol for changing topology with a same shared secret, I suspect you'd give me a funny look.
I tell you to use a separate instance of OSPF.
And what that would sort of devolve to is one instance per peer set, I think. And you saw that there's no 1,000 peers. The scaling of that's sort of scary. Okay.
Yeah, Joel Yeagley. Yeah, one of those OSPF neighbors decides to get out of sync, and then all of them get to rebuild their adjacencies again. That happens all the time. Oh, it absolutely is true. Not with your implementation. Good. Well, maybe you should talk to Cisco then. I think one of the things and I don't want to particularly kick DE6 here, but topological partition is not necessary to lose bridge table entries in their implementation. And so black holes exist in their infrastructure all the time. And so even when things are not broken, i.e. when they're working normally. And so the way you solve that on their infrastructure is to not use the route reflectors, actually, because they're kind of a liability. Because you actually can't see which of your neighbors is the one that's in fact black holing towards you. So I think work in this area is actually super useful.
Yeah, and, certainly, DE-CIX as a specific vendor has, their own specific headaches based on how they built their fabric out. You and I have been in places where it's different technology, anywhere down to frame relay, and this problem still exists.
Job Snyders, NTT. Can you go back to the DE-CIX topological overview? So the case of a partition is actually very clean cut, but in reality, at least common operational practice is that the moment an internet exchange of this size becomes partitioned in any meaningful way, it usually does not mean that all the fibers got cut cleanly. It means that something went very wrong, like a loop and in such cases, I don't think it's a desirable property to receive backup paths from the route server, but I would rather just want to shut down anything that goes over that internet exchange.
That's a possibility too.
So I like with route server BFD drafts, if the participants have very fast detection, that is a very desirable property. I don't think it's desirable to offer alternative paths at any cost, because when a few sessions go wrong, often it means the whole exchange is poisoned and you just need to wait a few hours before you get traffic back. Of course, this is only applicable to the internet exchange use case, and I understand from you that there are other use cases that are not internet exchanges, but where route servers could be useful. So perhaps it would be interesting to see if in the draft something to that effect can be documented to not offer alternative paths when it's an internet route server, but in other cases take different approaches.
And certainly, as I mentioned, the protocol can actually be used as just simply telemetry for the route server to see that something's gone awry, and that in itself is a useful thing.
Randy Bush, making believe he's John Scudder. This all came from actually somebody at DE-CIX saying to me, "Why do I hate route servers?" And I explained that it'll keep giving me routes to a black hole. And he said, "Well, fix it." And so this is the attempt. The reason I like BFD and have stuck with it despite Jeff complicating it is that it measures exactly what I want. The likelihood of me running OSPF over to some stranger is 0. IGPs are sharing blood, right? There's a distinct problem that a fair number of the participants in the exchange are on routers with insufficient memory, et cetera, et cetera. That's why they're using route server. 2 reasons to use route server. 1, less configuration. I don't have to add peers manually. But 2 is I can't hold all the routes. Okay, so I'm certainly not going to handle add path. But to confess, we are going to have a problem with rollout in this, that the smaller routers will take a fair while before they have BFD. Lastly, the route servers, if you read the RFC, are really designed for this. It's just an easy add because they are keeping the fully implementation, and this is implemented. This is what everybody has in Bird at their exchanges today, are keeping the separate rib for each customer. So it's real easy. When that customer says, I can't get to next hop 32, to deliver the next best path. Sorry to ramble on.
Christoph Leiber, Next Layer Communications. Thank you for this draft. We got hit with this problem, or we observed this problem quite a few times already on different internet exchanges. I think it's a good idea to use like some kind of auto-provisioning BFD here. On the other side, I really like the route server to give me all its routes and even alternative paths if there are any. So I'm not sure if like putting this states that we already have on the routers connected to the exchange, exchanging that with the route server and making more and more overhead, making the decision on the route server more complex that can be easily distributed on the routers connected there. So I would vote for AddPath because from an operator perspective, I want to get all the routes that you have, and I want to select which routes I want to put in my table.
And this mechanism does not preclude an AddPath solution. Again, the observation is, as Randy made, some boxes are resource constrained. In those cases, this feature is certainly a better fit. If you want to have AddPath all, it's totally up to you.
Yeah. Actually, the thing is, I think it just adds very much to the complexity of what you're bringing up here, because you need all these state exchanges and everything. So if you just have this BFD auto provisioning in there, it's maybe much easier, and we are much faster at the goal to have like no black holing at IXPs maybe.
Yeah, so I do want to make the observation that every single BGP implementation has to implement the resolvability condition as part of 4271. Now, can you reach this next hop? If you can't, this route is removed from selection. It's part of standard route selection. So mostly what this protocol is doing is just proxying that state from the perspective of the client, so that the route server can do exactly what's a standard part of 4271. So this is nothing scary in terms of what the impact is of the BGP implementation. It's just how do you get the state over to the route server.
Okay, Robert Raszuk. So can you go to your last slide for a second? Yes, so you made the comment about this being complex for the current ASICs and the current forwarding. Can you elaborate a bit more? What do you mean by that?
I did not say complex. I said it's
unsupported, you said.
Correct. So your lower end Broadcom stuff supports a single hop BFD. Single hop BFD spec-wise requires the endpoints to be provisioned. The change to 5881 to allow for the wildcard stuff is not a hard change to the protocol, but it's just a matter of how do you actually get it out into stuff that is chip-based.
No, so let me clarify. So this only changes the establishment moment, which is still going through the RP. It doesn't touch the packet after you establish the BFD session, negotiate discriminators. The runtime, it's still the same for the data plane.
You are mistaken in how BFD is set up on many of the lower end systems.
I'm going to ask you guys to cut this off and conclude it offline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Alexander Azimov, and today I'd like to provide an update to our draft. It's about route leak prevention using roles, and also to give answers to the questions that were raised in the mailing list and also privately. I would like to start with some insight of current route leaks that are happening in the wild and discuss, is it reasonable to target route leaks only at the level of stub ISPs. So here are a few examples that were taking place during last few months. There are 4 route leaks. All these route leaks affected more than 1,000 prefixes. The second one even resulted in a denial of service for a number of networks. And if we are looking at this list, only one of these networks was a stub one. So for me, it seems obvious that the problem of route leaks is more general. It is not related only to stub networks. It's just happening on the transit, on the big transit on the local T1s. So it's just happening. And if we are speaking about the problem even more general, I see as a middle-term goal is simplification of BGP configuration process. We need to help not only newcomers, but to help engineers to configure BGP in a simple way without bringing any risks to other parties. But okay, let's move back to our small goal of route leak prevention. So at the time of working group adoption, the draft had next qualities. It had a new mandatory configuration option, which is called roles, and it just resembles the peering relations between autonomous systems. It's have 5 values, including complex, which is ad hoc to help in situations when the simple 4 roles are not enough. It also includes IOTC, which is non-transit attribute. It's just a flag, and if roles are configured, with the help of IOTC, it just prevents ISP from leaking. That's all. And we got a few really good questions about the draft. So let's just imagine that we have got a software update and with these draft implemented, and but the old configuration file has no roles. So what should we do? Should we raise a parser error, or should we, for example, made some default value of roles? I think these both of these options are not suitable, and they break polar, and they are not sound promising. There were also a lot of questions about complex roles, and one of the questions was, okay, we have a verification for regular roles. Do we have verification for prefix roles? Unfortunately, there is no a simple way to achieve this. And so our current idea is to do next thing, and we have already uploaded it in next version of draft. So we removed that roles are mandatory. It just solves the problem of the router update. We do not need a default value of roles anymore, so it looks fine. We also removed complex, because complex was an ad hoc, and it resulted in more questions that it solved. And unfortunately, and for those who are looking still for more flexibility, opportunity to make their links complex, okay, just do it. Just keep doing what you are doing now. You do not need roles in this. Use roles when the situation is simple, and be happy with this. But removing the mandatory status of roles have, of course, its own trade-off, because when we had mandatory status, everybody should set up roles. If nobody will set up roles, this mechanism will become useless. But I hope this will not happen. By itself, roles simplify the configuration process. Instead of set up filters using communities, you are just able to set up one configuration option and prevent your network from leaking. So I believe it will become popular by itself. There is also a BGP reject draft that states make a statement that if there is no policy, there will be no announces, no exchange of routes, and so on. But we do not say about it if the policy must be configured manually or it will be configured automatically in case of roles. We also have a strict mode, which could be used as a motivation when one ISP may try to enforce usage of roles by the other side. And roles may have a number of other applications, including route leak detection and mitigation. So I have a few slides more, but I'd like to stop here and to ask if you have any questions, if you think that we are moving in the right way. So please go to Mike and share your thoughts.
Sriram Nist. So since complex is removed now, should we have in the draft like recommendation what the router should do with regard to not use IOTC at all, or how to populate IOTC?
If the IOTC is just a path attribute, so you are able to configure it with your per prefix policy.
Great. Okay.
If the roles are configured, the IOTC will be set automatically. So the draft will just do not cover the situation. We can make a clarification, configure it upon your policy if it's needed.
You don't think the draft needs to say that if it is configured complex per prefix, in that case, the operator would configure it per prefix. Shouldn't the draft say that in that case, from the configuration, you can automatically set IOTC? It should say something along those lines, shouldn't it?
If you are configuring your policy to set up IOTC, it is not made automatically. So automatically it is set if the roles are configured. So it's just an option. For example, if you have some complex behavior between you and your peering, not peering partner, but another complex partner. So you are able to set up IOTC according to your policy, per prefix policy. But the draft will not cover this part. So because there is no opportunity to verify this per prefix policy, we are just, okay, keep doing what you are doing.
You can automate from configuration also, that once the configuration is set and the per prefix roles are set, from the configuration, you can automatically drive how to set IOTC, can't you?
What do you mean automatically? I'm really missing your point.
The software, the software, you can code it in the software, take the information from the configuration for each prefix, whether the role is, whatever the role is, and accordingly you can set the IOTC, can't you?
My meaning of automation is that you are not configuring IOTC. IOTC is configured automatically from the roles setup. What are you speaking? Do not conflict with my view. You are just calling automatically if something is just configured in the configuration file.
My feeling is that configuration, something in the configuration doesn't mean that you cannot have code that takes information from the configuration to do what you need to do. With regard, what we are after all looking for is to have an intra-AS messaging from ingress to egress, and that messaging is IOTC in this draft, right? And someone else could be using community for that. So can't you, all I'm saying is that the software can look into the configuration and say that these are the per prefix roles, and accordingly I will set this IOTC or a community attribute. So that could be automatic. It doesn't have, it doesn't have to be BGP open necessarily for it to make it automatic.
Okay, thank you. From my perspective, there is no need of per prefix roles. They just bring additional complexity to the draft and nothing else.
Alexander Lemon, Curator Labs. Don't you think that examples of how IOTC can be used in complex situations should be moved to separate paper?
No, I don't think so. It's just IOTC. It's just a flag. You know, it just shows that these prefix was learned from provider or peer, nothing else.
So you're providing us a tool without giving instructions how to use it without harming ourselves, right?
No. I'm speaking that there is no need to move it to the other paper. Maybe we should clarify it in the draft, but just another paper to cover only this. Does it make sense?
That particular point you may want to talk a little bit more about specifics. Okay, offline.
Okay.
Job Snyders, NTT, from the I Talk Too Much department. Somewhere in the draft you say that, or the authors say that if a open policy mechanism is used that is considered to satisfy the BGP reject RFC. Yeah. I'm not sure if that wording is entirely appropriate within the context of what I think the open policy approach is trying to do. The BGP reject RFC applies to any and all address families, simply because it was argued that you can never know what the actual intention is of setting up an address family and exchanging information in that AVI. So exchanging nothing, unless you configure it to do otherwise, is a safe approach. I think the open policy specifically applies to IPv4 and IPv6 unicast routes, and it would be not wise, I think, to open it up for any and all AVIs. So the authors could consider the argument to limit it to V4 and V6. I misheard you or didn't hear you correctly, but are you saying this should be mandatory?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I figured for backwards compatibility reasons, it makes sense to not have it mandatory.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
Keyur Patel, Arcus. I'm actually in favor of making it generic and make it as a default policy for all the other address families where we don't see a need, but we see a need making it as a default, particularly for the VPN address families. So while the applicability is there, in my mind, from a code perspective, the code could signal and have different applicabilities for V4 and V6 because there are relationships. In VPN, you could use it at an inter-AS level in a different manner versus a PEC level.
Of course, internet use and VPN use are relatively similar to each other, except for one is in the constrained domain and one is the public domain. But we do not know what future APIs bring or mean or what their semantics are. And in that regard, I think it's unsafe to open that door and create behavior that essentially goes counter to the purpose of the BGP reject RFC.
Please correct me. As the BGP rejects RFC, there is no specification about which office. It is not restricted to IPv4, IPv6. Am I right?
It applies to every API.
Sure. So it just says that if there is no policy, there will be no export imports announces.
Correct.
We do not add anything. So if there is no policy, manually configured or automatically configured with roles, there will be no announce, nothing more.
But if you do configure a role, and the intention is to provision a VPN v4 product or an IPv4 product, you also open up the other APIs,
sure,
whatever they mean.
Sure. But just the same as BGP reject, you are just shipping it to. You are able to configure it in the way you want. There is, I do not see here a problem.
We'll discuss it further during lunch. Perhaps we're indeed wrestling over some wording.
Okay, sure.
So speaking of lunch, I just want to say we're starting to, we're not short on time yet, but I don't know if you want to concentrate on finishing your slide deck or the conversation is useful. So manage your time as you prefer.
Okay, one last question.
So just on the, sorry, Ben Madison, Work Online. Just on the previous conversation regarding the multiple AFIs, I've come across instances where people are multi-purposing a single session to do internet peering and build option CNNIs with other providers. When that's going on, it's not clear to me how the peer-to-peer role that this draft would impose would impact the distribution of the VPN v4 routes with other NNI providers that might be involved in providing the same VPNs. And I think trying to second guess how those arrangements are made would be pretty hard. I think in general, the thing that I don't love about this is route distribution policy is fundamentally it's a policy thing which lives in address families, and we're trying to impose it at the session level. And I think we're going to run repeatedly into issues of this kind of nature.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I think I will try to catch you also at lunch and discuss it, because I need a clarification in it. So now I'd like to address a few questions to the working group members. These questions are from authors to working group because we do not have a consensus here. First one seems to be minor, but it locks the allocation procedure. So we have two scenarios to send notification. They're similar but different. First one, if we have a conflict pairing roles, we're sending notification. Second one, if one side is using strict mode and the other side is not using roles or not configuring roles, it will be again a notification. The question is, do we need two subcodes or one subcode? And what is current best practice for such situations? So please advise. No best practice? Do whatever you want?
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. I don't know about best practice or precedent, but looking at the question, I would say these are actually different scenarios where the signaling to the potentially failing end should be distinct. So use two codes and
okay. And so if there is no objective, we will use two subcodes.
Job Snyders. On the flip side, the subcode within its context will mean something, and the site that is in strict mode can associate a different meaning to the same number than the site that is not in strict mode. I don't know if this is a big or a small registry and whether we are pressed for code points, but
Okay, sure. I heard privately several times a different opinion, but okay, let's keep moving with two subcodes. And now this, okay, Randy.
It's a 128-bit registry, but you can only use the first 64.
Okay, so the next question is more important one. Imagine ourselves in a world when the roles are globally deployed. Do we need in this world a route leak detection and mitigation? Currently, there are two drafts that target these problems of detection and mitigation, and both of them have a side effect of revealing or giving some hint about peering relationships between ISPs. We don't have a consensus here. From my perspective, route leak detection and mitigation is also important. It is just to have laws about guns, and at the same time to keep selling the body armor which is needed for some nasty situations. And also route leak detection and mitigation could be helpful at the state of partial deployment, just decreasing the collateral damage. So please share your thoughts. Do we need route leak detection and mitigation if we will have route leak prevention?
Please keep your comments brief. We're up against time now.
Sriram, NIST. So I think it is important to have route leak detection and mitigation as well. As you have pointed out, there will be partial deployment for a very long time for the intra-AS solution. Therefore, the major ISPs would like to have a mechanism if the customer or customer AS is not implementing anything for intra-AS mitigation, intra-AS prevention. Then you do need a way of signaling between ISPs so that when the route passes from one ISP through the customer AS to another ISP, the customer is not doing any of this, but the two ISPs can signal to each other that must have a way of signaling so that the second ISP knows there has been a route leak, and that will take care of a lot of situations where the deployment is partial, right?
Yes, I do agree, but the problem is that this mechanism will reveal, or not reveal, give a hint about peering relationships. And will these ISPs eager to reveal these relationships as a trade-off for the signaling?
Again, I'm gonna, please go ahead, and then I'm gonna ask the authors to discuss this at lunch. There's some stuff underneath it.
Alexander Lemon, Curator Lab. Sasha, given tools at your disposal and current amount of publicly available information, can you, with good probability, say what is relationship, say, between Job and Randy?
Lovers. They're so complex.
Okay, they networks.
But yes, on the other hand, there is an opportunity to reveal these most of the peering relationships, to reveal it without already without any help of these attributes. Yes, there is such opportunity, but still, it will give another hint.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to apologize, but we're going to have to trim the conversation. By the way, I thank you all for providing all the good feedback to Alexander. I really encourage this topic to go a couple layers more. I'd like to ask the room, is there interest in having an interim or virtual or physical on this? If so, would you hum? I hear some hums. The chairs will work on that.
Good morning. My name is Zheng Qiangli from China Mobile. Today, I'd like to report the current status of this draft in version 05. The scenario to be addressed: to aid traffic steering, network operators want to know the congestion status of the exit links. The following two scenarios will benefit from knowing the congestion status information. Scenario 1, within one AS. Please look at the picture on this page. Autonomous system A has 3 ASBR, router 6, router 7, and router 8. If the exit routers, router 7 and router 8, tell their IBGP peers in this autonomous system the congestion status of the exit links, the peers in this autonomous system can steer some outgoing traffic towards the less loaded exit links. And scenario 2, for the multiple autonomous systems. Supposing autonomous system A prefers to using ASB to access ASC due to cost or network performances. If ASA knows the link between router 2 and router 3 is congested, it can steer some traffic towards ASC from going to ASB to the directed connected links between router 1 and Route 6, right? The authors from France Telecom also specified this kind of requirement in one of their drafts. The suggested solution is to introduce a new extended community to deliver the link congestion status. To satisfy the above two application scenarios, this kind of extended community should be transitive, which means it can travel across multiple autonomous systems. The suggested solution can be used both in a network with a central controller or without it. For the network with a central controller, BGP NLS can also be used to get the congestion status, of course. For the network with route reflectors are recommended to enable at-pass functionality to advertise all the alternative routes to S-clans. This is the detail about the suggested congestion status extended community. I will not explain it again here. I know, as discussed in the mail list, we need to optimize it further if the working group accepts this requirement. Although route oscillation and traffic oscillations may be caused by the introduced method, those are the main issues we discussed a lot in the previous meetings and list. But when taking the considerations here into account, I believe the suggested methods can be used in a controlled scope of network. For example, the BGP receiver may choose to only trust the congestion status information advertised by some specific autonomous systems or advertised by the autonomous systems within 2 or 3 hops. For ANA requirement, we do not change this part. One subtab is needed. So for the next tab, I think it should be accepted by the working group since the requirement is clear, and operators such as France Telecom, Orange, and China Mobile, of course, are interested in it. Thank you.
So of course we can have discussion during working group adoption call on the mailing list. If there are any short comments right now, please go to the mic.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. I missed in the presentation some indication of what your thoughts of the dynamics occurring on the on this attribute would be. The other, and I think that should be well understood. And the other very short comment is, if I read your slide right, you are limited to links at 256 bits, I think it was. I think we are already beyond that scope in the actually deployed technology.
So, you mean the bandwidth in this fig? So the unit is in 10 gigabytes per second. So 10, yes, 10 is the unit.
Still, that would give this a very limited lifetime until being exceeded.
Rudiger and
Yes, I do agree that we need further effort to make the solution to be perfect. But here I want I want the working group to adopt the requirements, and we can work together to optimize the solution, right?
G and Zidane and Rudiger, maybe you could sit at the back and just give them a few pointers, Rudiger, afterwards.
Yeah, we have been criticized in the past by people in this room for polishing drafts to the point where they're already done before we accept them as working group drafts. So just as a reminder, the bar for accepting as a working group draft should generally be, we want to work on this problem. We think this is pretty much the right idea. Now, that's the point where we adopt it, and then we can polish it after that.
I believe you're the next presentation as well, or are you doing the presentation, G? Okay, please go ahead with your second.
Nilufar from Cisco. I don't get it why you cannot use MED or local pref attribute instead of defining a new extended community. Thank you.
Sorry?
Was the question not clear? I'm not getting why you cannot use MED or local pref instead of defining a new extended community.
Large communities actually could do everything.
And we have community container.
What's it?
So maybe I will consider to choose another community to deliver the congestion status, but the intended community is widely used. So to deliver the locally defined policies to the BGP routers, the BGP community container is also an optional solution.
Okay, guys, we're going to have to go on to the next draft. Please, this sounds like there's lots of interest. I encourage you to, at the end of the meeting, go to the back of the room and have some good discussion.
Thank you.
Also, we have a working group adoption call coming. This would be the ideal time to engage with questions like that.
This is second draft, popular to FIP action for Flossback. Jiedong presented this draft in the Chicago meeting. The main content of this draft is to introduce a bit, we call it F bit, in the traffic action extended community to indicate the associated specifications should be populated in FIP after appropriate process. So why do we want to do this? In routers, BGP Flossback rules are stored in a distinct set of RIPs according to their AFI and SAFI pairs. After validation and ordering processing, the RIPs are then populated to the dedicated hardware, which usually is shared with access control list. The dedicated hardware is much more expensive and space limited when compared with the forwarding information base. Usually, forwarding information base can contain several millions entries. When Flossback is used for dynamic traffic flow steering, the number of Flossback rules increases and changes frequently. So to save the limited and expensive space of the dedicated hardware, it is better to populate some Flossback rules to FIP if possible. And we think the destination prefix-based Flossback rules are suitable to be populated to the FIP. The solution is very simple. A new bit is introduced in the action extended community. If FBIT is set and the associated flow spec rules cannot be populated to FIP, the associated rules must be ignored. This part, we add this part in this version based on the concerns raised by Jeff Hans. So thanks, Mr. Jeff Hans. Flow spec rules are ordering sensitive. After ordering processing, they are searched sequentially until a matching rule is found. But for forwarding information base, it has no ordering implications. Longest prefix matching is the rule to choose the matching entrance in FIP. So only the destination prefix based FBIT tagged flow spec rules that pass the validation and the ordering process are suitable to be populated into the forwarding information base. And usually, flow spec rules have a higher priority than corresponding IDP and BGP routing entries. So to guarantee this, the following 3 steps we have to do. First one, when populating the FIP, the flow spec rules are preferred than the corresponding IDP and BGP routing entries. Second, when a flow spec rule is being populated into the FIP entrance covered by this flow spec rule must be removed or replaced by it. The third one, the populate flow spec rules in the FIP must not be overridden by IDP or BGP updates. So I suggest the working group to adopt this draft also.
Robert Rashuk, Bloomberg. So who sets the FBIT? Because if the guy who injects the rule sets the FBIT, you just don't inject the rule.
Yeah. The router who generates the flow spec rules set the bit.
That's sending this out. It's no point, right? Because you said it must be ignored without the FBIT, so it's gonna just occupy memory and CPU without any use case.
So there are no other comments. I guess we can take it to the list. Thank you.
Robert, it might be good to ask the question again on the list.
I'm AC Linda. Since the first version of this draft, Jeff has joined as an author and given us some very good feedback. And a lot of the changes in this version are based on discussions initiated by his comments. The requirements for this is a lot of times you want to discover your peers. You don't want to have to configure every peer so that you can have minimal configurations, especially if you're using BGP in a data center, as the routing working group draft, I forget, 76, whatever it is. So what this does is and you also want to be able to not only peer on the interface address, but the loopback addresses. And additionally, one thing we thought that would give us capabilities beyond what's currently being used is being able to learn authentication methods and potentially pass other state that you'd need to use those authentication mechanisms. Just as a review, we're going to use LLDP. That's IEEE 802.1ab. It's implemented on just about every vendor's routers and switches. we already have, there already is an IEEE mechanism for advertising organizationally specific TLVs inside of LLDP. Now, all we have to, and IANA, based on an RFC, I guess I don't have the name, the RFC, but it was by Donald. So we already have an OUI for IANA. So all we need to do in order to do this that I can see is for us to add an IANA registry for IETF organizationally specific TLVs. The first one we'd add with this registry would be BGP config. And then we'd have sub TLVs, peering address, local AS, BGP identifier, this group ID, which I'm going to talk about more. This was Jeff's idea, and BGP session capabilities and keychain name. So in the last one, in order to peer on loopback addresses, and we discussed this quite a bit among the authors, was we were going to actually add and delete routes based on LLDP. And we decided that LLDP is really a discovery mechanism. Making it a RIB client isn't really a good idea. And I think that would also raise the bar on implementation of this. So we got rid of that completely. We're still allowing two-hop peering via LLDP discovery, except we're making the reachability out of scope. So you'd have to have that through some other mechanism. And I also added a peering wildcard. This is similar to things that have been in other drafts for dynamic discovery of what address families are being used for peering addresses. So if you use the 00 tuple for AFI-SAFI, that means that you'll peer on all your configured address families. Now because this really, you'd only really want to use this because of the capabilities negotiation and things would happen. You'd only want to use it in deployments where the address families are fairly homogeneous, the mix of them. Secondly, for AS transitions, you can now advertise up to 2 ASs. We added an optional, these are all optional, added an optional BGP identifier sub-DLV. Of course, you learn it during the open, you don't really need it. But what we thought we could use this for validation, and also what Sean pointed out, was you could have a local heuristic to not prevent, but decrease the likelihood of a connection collision by delaying, some random amount if you have the lower BGP identifier ID. And we've added this group ID abstraction. This would allow you to still have the flexibility of not have to configuring all your peering addresses, but you could have like templates for different ones, and you could use this purely local abstraction of the group ID, which is just a 4-byte number that points something that characterizes that set of sessions. For example, if you're in the routing working group and you're following the data center routing optimization discussion, you could use it to characterize your northbound or southbound sessions, BGP sessions. And also we added an optional keychain name. I'm not sure if this is the right thing, but we have now, keychain is kind of a quasi IETF standard with the IETF keychain Yang model. And you could use that keychain with either MD5 or TCP/AO authentication. Next steps. It turns out that vendors already have some limited mechanisms. For example, a lot of people are supporting discovery of the link local address and peering on it using neighbor discovery, IPv6 neighbor discovery, and the router advertisements in neighbor discovery. This is a little bit, this is kind of just a big hammer, because you just peer on whoever is on the point-to-point link, and you don't have any information on address families or authentication or any validation. So we would, based on interest. I think there's a lot more here. Additionally, I have learned, and we're going to add that vendor as a contributor, that there are some vendors that are using their own LLDP, organizationally specific TLVs, to discover BGP peering. So any comments? David?
David Lamparter. So we are one of those implementations that can do that based on IPv6 neighbor discovery. I think it works based on RAs, so
Yes,
you
it
can actually
does.
enable that. However, and completely regardless of having that feature, my view is that LDP is the completely wrong place for this.
LLDP.
LLDP, yeah.
I agree, LDP is wrong.
Well, yes. No, two L's. I don't see why we are suddenly going to a layer 2 protocol that may, for example, not even be supported if I'm talking on a GRE tunnel that I want to set up a BGP peering over. And I would actually suggest you take the entire thing, put it into IPv6 ND, and have the same TLVs there, maybe in the new packet or whatever, I don't care. You're doing the very same thing. You're multicasting out your data for setting up the peering. You don't need to go to the IEEE with it. You can actually fix all of the existing hacks that are already relying on neighbor discovery and get the same thing and go with that.
You realize I may retire in the next 5 years.
So are you telling me it's easier to get TLVs added in LDP, which is an IEEE thing, rather than get it added into ND?
Yes.
That is very, very sad.
But because we already have, IANA already has the organizationally specific, and that's the place that we would put it. We can add our own registry right now. I mean, it's easier to implement. It's easier to have. I think it is.
So I can tell you, for me, this is 3 orders of magnitude harder to implement, because now I actually have to go to the LDP component, tell it to advertise those extra TLVs, and try and extract them back. And it's actually a component that's completely out of the scope of my software stack. But
I'm going to have to apologize, but we need very brief comments because we're running out of time, and we need to let the last presenter have some. So please keep your comments brief.
Sorry, Keyur Patel Arcus. So don't implement it. We'll get you a freeware code. Don't worry. But the point is, the reason to take it to LLDP is that there is no discovery protocol available that is fairly generic enough that applies to number of networks, and LLDP is the only one out there. So it's a compromise. Really.
2 brief comments, Robert Rashuk. So one comment is about error handling. If you messed up your TLV sub-TLVs with BGP and LLDP will fail, then it's worse, right? And the second, even with vanilla LLDP, you can get the peering IP address and do VGP open blindly to all IP service configure, which data center is pretty much just 1.1 or 2.1. So you don't need any extra TLV sub-TLVs to achieve your functionality.
That's not true. LLDP doesn't advertise the interface address.
Go ahead, Donald.
Just real quick, it's RFC 7042.
Thanks,
That's
Donald.
7042, Section 4, about allocating miscellaneous things like this under the IANA OUI.
Okay, we're going to go to the last presenter.
And I'm Donald Eastlake from Huawei.
Yeah, thank you, Donald, for saying that slowly. Even though we run over.
Okay, good morning. I'm Marcus Song from Huawei Company, and my colleague Burgess is online. And also there's a course or phone call from our Chinese top internet company, Baidu. So today we want to introduce a very simple method to help the hybrid scale data center to realize the fast link status. So nowadays, managing a large number of switch links in a data center from a controller is a difficult scale problem. So from our requirement of our clients, multi-hop BGP is more and more widely used due to BGP product pressure caused by point-to-point connection in a hyperscale data center. And also, it's true we have many solutions to solve the problem, but it has some limitation. For example, the BGP keep live mechanism and some other similar mechanism may result in high convergence delays. And the BFD state monitoring, it may have too much operator error and a high cost of configuration of different devices and different ports. So our main goal is to use BGP community to instruct the router to automatically self-monitor links and allow the controller to send a single route update message just once and only receive link status change when they occur. And also we want to improve speed of receiving link status change, and what we focus is to help those hyperscale data centers where BGP is used as a route protocol. So it's our solution. First step, the controller sends a route update message A1 to the first device, R1, and once again, the message is sent non-periodical just once. And the routers can establish a peer, and the message A1 contains a one-hop community attribute, and its prefix is used to identify device R1. And R1 will add a no export attribute in the message and it will be sent out. And the next step, the R1 will send a message to R2/3 BGP, and then here we define a dedicated bit in communities attribute to instruct R2 to start monitoring its link, and R1 and R2 can begin to monitor all links between one another. Sorry. And finally, if link status changes, R2 sends a message back to the controller with either nonce or withdraw type. And when the controller receives route A1 update message from R2, so first it can locate corresponding link based on prefix and source IP in the message. And if the message is route nonce type, link status is normal, and otherwise link status is fault. And we want to notice here that we do not prefer any link detection mechanism, and the BGP implementation on a vendor device is free to activate any link detection mechanism it chooses. Yeah, that's all. Questions? So it's our first version. We want to collect all of your interests or clarify the requirements for the better next round.
AC Lynn, this is just a quick one. I just read it real quickly and I didn't think too much about this, but I wonder, did you think about, since it's a controller mechanism, did you think about BGP-LS?
Oh, so you mean the background considered BGP Live? Oh, yes. So, yeah, it's true that there are some many solutions to have, but we focus on the scenario that the multi-hop BGP in a data center. Yeah, so that is what the real problem in our client's data center. Yeah.
Okay, and we have a comment from Meet Echo. So Burgess, you should be unmuted now.
Hello, can you hear me?
It's 2 a.m. in America.
Yes, loud
So
and clear.
just to AC's comment, we could use BGP-LS, but it's too heavy. What we're trying to do is automate the process of configuring BGP and a link detection together. And if a bit or a community can do it, that just makes the self-configuration much better. But there are many other ways. I mean, you could, if you think a little bit outside the box of BGP, you can do it with a proprietary protocol also.
Thank you.
No more questions?
If there's no further questions or comments, then we're closed.
One other question from the chair. Is there interest in having a virtual interim on the ability to work with connect link availability and BGP. Would we have a hum if there is? Okay, we'll take that to the list. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.